It started with a sound. The wet, sickening crack of a fist against something fragile. And then the silence. The silence of 100 people turning away, pretending not to see. On the cold steel deck of a trading station, a life was being beaten out and the galaxy didn't care. It was just another day in the dark. But then, a new voice cut through the cruelty. A voice that wasn't from around here. A voice that said 2 words that would end up starting a war and changing the galaxy forever. 2 words, that's enough. Hey everyone. That's the moment that changes everything in the story I'm about to tell you. If you want to find out who that voice belongs to, and what happens when they stand up to the dark, you're in the right place. But before we dive in, if you love stories that explore the best and worst of humanity and the worlds beyond, do me a huge favor. Hit that like button, click subscribe, and ring that notification bell. It's a small click for you, but it helps this channel reach more people, and it means the world to me. Also, let me know in the comments where in the world you're watching from. I love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you have suggestions for what kind of story I should tell next, drop those in the comments too. Alright, you ready? Grab a drink, get comfortable. Let's begin. Our story begins on Trade Hub Terminus. Picture a sprawling metallic spiderweb floating in the black, a place where fortunes are made in the glittering upper spires, and lives are broken in the rusted, smog-choked lower decks. This isn't a city, it's a machine. And in every machine there are cogs. Our story is about the smallest, most overlooked cog of all, a being named Tillio. Tillio was a Kalan, a species known for their delicate, bird-like frames and gentle nature. They were soft. Too soft for a place like Terminus. Tillio worked in the cargo bays, sorting and lifting containers that were often twice his size. It was back-breaking, thankless work. But it was work. It was survival. What made Tillio's life even more precarious was his disability. Years ago, a mining accident had shattered his left sensory antenna. For a Kalan, these antennae were everything. They perceived sound, subtle barometric shifts, and even the emotional states of others. Tillio's was a wreck of scarred tissue and misfiring nerves. It left him partially deaf, perpetually disoriented, and in constant, dull pain. In the cutthroat culture of Terminus, this didn't just make him disabled. It made him defective. A resource drain. A walking piece of broken equipment. The other workers, even other Kalans, kept their distance. Weakness, you see, was contagious, and Tillio was the weakest thing in the lower decks. Every day was a gauntlet. He'd finish his long shift, his muscles trembling with fatigue, and begin the long walk back to his tiny, cupboard-like dwelling. He'd navigate the crowded, chaotic market district, keeping his head down, his one good antenna twitching, trying to sense and avoid the predators. The predators were everywhere. The most dangerous was Vorgus. Vorgus was a Krogar, a species that might as well have been carved from granite. He was massive, a mountain of muscle and scales, working as an enforcer for station security. This meant he was the law in the lower decks. And he loved his job. He loved the fear he inspired. He was the classic bully given a badge and a heavy stick. And for months, Tillio had been his favorite target. It started small. A shove here. A lost ration pack there. Verbal taunts spat at Tillio, just loud enough for his damaged antenna to pick up the garbled malice. Tillio did what he had always done. He made himself small. He apologized. He endured. He survived. One evening, Tillio was more exhausted than usual. A triple shift, a double docking. His limbs felt like lead. He was shuffling through the market, his gaze fixed on the grimy floor, just trying to get home. He didn't see the crowd part. He didn't sense the shift in the air. He stumbled, trying to catch his balance, and bumped. Not hard. Just a brush. But he bumped right into the solid, unmoving leg of Vorgus. Tillio's blood ran cold. He looked up, his one good eye widening in terror. Vorgus, who had been holding court with his crew, stopped laughing. He looked down. A slow, cruel smile spread across his face. Well, Vorgus's voice boomed, a low rumble that hurt Tillio's head. Look what the scrap heap coughed up. It's the defect. This was it. The moment he had dreaded every day. Tillio scrambled to apologize, his voice a thin, reedy whisper. I'm sorry, Officer Vorgus, I didn't see you, please. Vorgus's smile widened. He looked around at the gathering crowd, at his laughing cohorts. He was a performer, and his audience had arrived. You didn't see me? Vorgus mocked, pointing to Tillio's scarred antenna. What's the matter, little cog? Your wiring finally give out. He nudged Tillio with his heavy boot. Not a kick. Not yet. Just a nudge. A promise. You're a drain, you know that? Vorgus continued, his voice dripping with contempt. Taking up air. Taking up space. Wasting resources. You're broken. He kicked Tillio's meager bag of rations, scattering them across the floor. Tillio let out a small involuntary cry and instinctively bent to pick them up. It was the opening Vorgis had been waiting for. The first kick was precise. It connected with Tillio's ribs, lifting his small body off the ground and sending him skidding across the grimy deck. A sharp, white-hot explosion of pain flared in his chest. He heard a crack. Not a sound from the outside world, but a sound from inside his own body. He gasped, but the air wouldn't come. Look at it. Vorgis bellowed to the crowd. It's as fragile as glass. Why do we even allow these things to live? His 3 Krogar crewmates, all just as large and menacing, fanned out. They formed a loose circle, cutting Tillio off from the rest of the market. This was now a sport. Tillio curled into a ball, his primary instinct to protect his head, to protect his one remaining good sensory antenna. It was the only part of him that still worked, the only part that connected him to the world. Get up, defect, another Krogar growled, prodding him with a boot. Tillio couldn't. He was trying to breathe. He could taste copper in his mouth. He's not getting up, Vorgis said, his voice laced with a predator's disappointment. Pathetic. He walked over and kicked Tillio again. And again. The heavy, thudding impacts were brutal. Each one was a fresh universe of agony. Tillio felt another rib go. Then another. He was a small, fragile thing and they were breaking him apart piece by piece. And the crowd? The crowd watched. This was the part that truly broke Tillio's spirit. Not the pain. He was used to pain. It was the silence. He could see them even with his blurry vision. Dozens of beings. Kalins like him hiding in the shadows. Other species, their faces a mix of curiosity or nothing. Just blank indifference. This was the law of Terminus. The strong devour the weak. The efficient purge the defective. And no one ever intervenes. To intervene was to paint a target on your own back. To intervene was to declare yourself a defect. So they watched. They watched as Tillio's small body was kicked and battered. They watched as Vorgis, growing bored, grabbed Tillio by his thin arm and dragged him. The rough-textured deck plating tore at Tillio's clothes and skin. He was too weak to resist. He was just a ragdoll. You're a mess, Vorgis grunted, clearly annoyed that his fun was over so quickly. I can't just leave you here. It's untidy. His crewmates laughed. Tillio knew what this meant. Vorgis was dragging him toward a side corridor. A dark, unmonitored maintenance passage used for waste disposal. This was no longer a public beating. This was an execution. Tillio's heart hammered against his broken ribs. This was it. This was how his small, painful life ended. Not in a heroic mining accident, but in a dark alley as a piece of trash being taken out by a bored bully. He was being dragged to his death and the galaxy watched. Vorgis entered the dark corridor, his massive frame blocking out the light from the market. He roughly dropped Tillio onto the floor. You know, Vorgis said, his voice echoing slightly in the narrow space. My boss, Administrator Xylo, he's always talking about efficiency. And you, little cog, you are the definition of inefficiency. He raised his heavy boot, aiming it directly at Tillio's head. Aiming for his good antenna. To finish the job. To break the last part of him. Tillio closed his eyes. He sent a small, silent apology to. He wasn't sure who. He just wished for 1 second that someone had cared. And then a new sound. A sound that didn't belong. It wasn't the sound of the market. It wasn't the sound of a Krogar. It was clipped. Clear. And dripping with an authority Tillio had never heard before. That's enough. Vorgis froze, his boot hovering in the air. He turned, his face a mask of confusion. Tillio opened his one good eye. Standing at the mouth of the corridor, silhouetted against the market lights, were 3 figures. They were small. Smaller than the Krogars for sure. They wore unfamiliar, practical uniforms of a dark, functional gray. They were soft-skinned. No scales, no fur, no visible claws. They were humans. The newcomers. The unstable, unpredictable, rumored to be crazy species that had only just joined the galactic community. Tillio stared, his mind unable to process what he was seeing. This was impossible. No one intervened. Ever. Vorgis slowly lowered his foot. He looked at the 3 humans, then back at Tillio, then at the humans again. His confusion was quickly melting into pure, unadulterated rage. Who were these things? What did you say? Vorgis growled, his voice low and threatening. The human in the front, a female, stepped forward into the dim light. She had Sergeant Rosalind on her uniform. She wasn't armed with a rifle, just a sidearm, but she carried herself like a weapon. Her eyes were cold and focused. "I said," Sergeant Rosalind repeated, her voice perfectly even, "that's enough. Let him go." One of Vorgis's crewmates laughed. "Or what, little mammal? You'll talk to us?" The second human, a young male named Private Darcy, shifted his stance. "Or you'll find out what happens when you don't." Tillio was in a state of shock. He was bleeding, his ribs were shattered, but his mind was crystal clear. This was insanity. These humans were small. Vorgis could break any one of them in half. What were they doing? Vorgis took a step toward them. "You're new here, aren't you? Humans. You're all unstable. You don't understand the rules. On Terminus we clean up our own trash. This thing is trash. It's broken. It's a defect." "He doesn't look like trash to me," said the third human, who was carrying a medical bag. He had Corpsman Bennett on his uniform. He didn't even look at Vorgis. His eyes were locked on Tillio. "He looks like a patient." Bennett moved past Rosalind and Darcy, walking directly toward the furious, multi-ton Krogar. Vorgis was so stunned by the sheer, suicidal audacity that he didn't even move. Bennett knelt beside Tillio. "Hey there," he said, his voice soft. "My name is Bennett. I'm a medic. I'm going to help you. Is that okay?" Tillio couldn't speak. He just stared. "A medic? For him? Stupid." Vorgis roared, finally finding his voice. "This is stupid. You're interfering with station security." "You're not security," Sergeant Rosalind said, her hand casually dropping to the holster of her sidearm. "You're a bully. And we really don't like bullies." This was the moment. The line in the sand. Vorgis and his crew tensed. The air crackled. This was going to become a firefight. "Rosalind," Private Darcy said, his eyes scanning the gathering crowd. "This is escalating. And he's right about one thing. It's their jurisdiction." "No," Rosalind said, her voice dropping. "Not when it's this. This isn't jurisdiction. This is attempted murder." As Bennett worked, his scanner chirped. "Sergeant, you need to see this." His voice was tight. "He's got multiple healed fractures. Ribs. Collarbone. This isn't the first time. This has been going on for months." That one sentence changed everything. The air in the alley, which had been tense, became ice cold. The professional detachment in Sergeant Rosalind's eyes was replaced by a slow, burning human fury. "Vorgis," she said, her voice now dangerously quiet. "You're under arrest." "You can't arrest me," Vorgis bellowed, laughing. "You have no authority. This is my station. In fact, you are interfering with an official." "An official. Culling." "That's not a word we recognize," Darcy said. "You will," a new voice snapped. A new figure pushed through the crowd. This one wasn't a Krogar. He was a HFY, a tall, insectoid being in a crisp, clean administrator's uniform. This was Administrator Xylo, Vorgis's boss, the one who really made the rules. "What is the meaning of this?" Xylo's voice clicked in word. "Human military. You are interfering with station operations. Stand down. Now." "Sir," Rosalind said, snapping to a more formal tone, "we found this officer about to execute a civilian." "Execute?" Xylo scoffed. "Don't be dramatic. Officer Vorgis was resolving a resource drain. This Kalen is defective. He costs the station more in resources than his labor provides. It is simple economics. It is our way. It is our custom." He pointed a long, spindly finger at Tillio. "You will hand over the defective Kalen. And then you will report to my office for a formal reprimand. Your captain will not be pleased." The humans looked at each other. Tillio's heart sank. This was it. The system was here. The real power. The humans were brave, but they were also soldiers. And soldiers followed orders. They had to give him up. Tillio tried to push himself up. "It's okay," he whispered to Bennett. "He's right. I'm a drain. Just go. Please. He'll hurt you too." Corpsman Bennett didn't move. He just looked at Tillio, his expression one Tillio couldn't understand. It wasn't pity. It was anger. But not at Tillio. "You're not a drain," Bennett said quietly but firmly. "You're a person. And we don't leave people behind." He looked up at Administrator Xylo. "He has multiple cracked ribs, severe internal bruising, and a concussion. He's a victim of assault. He's not defective. He's injured." Xylo let out a sound like dry leaves crushing. XY laugh. "Injured. Defective. The terms are interchangeable. His injuries were sustained because he is weak. His weakness is a drain on the strong. This is the way of the galaxy. This is the natural order. This is efficiency. He gestured to Vorgus. You humans with your emotions. You are a new, unstable element. You do not understand. Now stand aside. No, sir. You don't understand, Private Darcy suddenly said, stepping forward. His voice was shaking slightly, but his eyes were firm. Darcy, stand down, Rosalind ordered. No, Sergeant, Darcy said, looking at her. He needs to hear this. We all do. He turned back to Xylo. You think we're new? You think this efficiency, this social Darwinism, is some advanced concept we just haven't figured out yet? Darcy laughed, a short, bitter sound. My species, our species, we've been arguing about this for thousands of years. We've seen this philosophy before. We've seen what it leads to. We've fought wars over it. We've built empires on it, and we've torn them down because of it. He pointed a finger not at Xylo but at his own chest. We are intimately familiar with this brand of cruelty. And we, as a species, made a choice. We decided that efficiency was a terrible way to measure a person. He looked at Xylo, then at Vorgus, then at the silent, watching crowd. You want to know our philosophy, Administrator? You want to know what the unstable humans believe? He walked over and stood protectively between Tillio and the aliens. We believe, Darcy said, his voice ringing out in the corridor, that every single life has inherent worth. A deep, profound silence fell. The crowd, the Krogars, even Xylo, they looked baffled. The concept was so alien, so inefficient. They couldn't process it. That, Xylo said, his voice dripping with venom, is the single most stupid and dangerous idea I have ever heard. It is a cancer to galactic order. You will be removed. He signaled, and from the crowd, more station security, Krogars and other armed species, emerged. They were outnumbered. Sergeant, Darcy said, permission to? Permission denied, Rosalind said. This isn't a fight we win with guns. She tapped her comms. Rosalind to Vanguard. Captain. We have a situation. A few moments of static. Then a new voice, older, calmer, and with the weight of absolute command, came over her comms. Explain, Sergeant. Rosalind explained. The beating. The administrator. The philosophy. There was a long pause. Tillio held his breath. Understood, Sergeant, the captain's voice said. Hold your position. I'm on my way. Captain, wait, Xylo said, realizing. This is a local matter. This is a violation of. This, the captain's voice cut through the comms, is now a human matter. 10 minutes later, the crowd parted like the sea. This time it wasn't for a bully. It was for Captain Arthur Hastings of the human flagship Vanguard. He arrived with 6 more Marines, fully armed, their armor gleaming. Hastings was an older man with kind eyes and a jaw of steel. He walked directly up to Administrator Xylo, ignoring Vorgus completely. Administrator, Hastings said, his voice polite but ironclad. My medical officer informs me this Kalan national is the victim of a severe, protracted assault. I am taking him to my ship's medical bay for treatment. We will, of course, file a full report. Captain? Xylo was furious. You can't. He is a resource of this station. He is ours to deal with. Captain Hastings looked at Xylo. Then he looked at Tillio, broken and bleeding on the floor. Then he looked back at Xylo. Administrator, Captain Hastings said, his voice quiet, my people have a very old, very simple rule. We do not, under any circumstances, hand a victim back to their murderers. Corpsman, private, get him ready for transport. Bennett and Darcy gently, so gently, lifted Tillio, placing him on a medical stretcher. Vorgus stepped forward. I'm not letting you. In a single, fluid motion, all 6 of the new Marines and Rosalind and Darcy all raised their rifles, the targeting lasers painting a dozen red dots on Vorgus's chest. I suggest, Captain Hastings said, not even raising his voice, that you step aside. Vorgus, for the first time in his life, looked afraid. He stepped aside. As they carried Tillio through the market, the crowd, the same crowd that had watched in silence. They stared. They stared as the small, fragile, broken Tillio was escorted by an honor guard of the most dangerous species on the station. He wasn't a defect. He was protected. The medical bay on the Vanguard was quiet. It was the first quiet Tillio had known in years. It was clean. The air didn't taste like smog and fear. A human doctor, a kind woman who introduced herself as Dr. Wells, was tending to his wounds. They had given him something for the pain, a warm, hazy blanket that settled over his broken body. Captain Hastings stood by the doorway, speaking quietly on his comms. He looked worried. Captain? Tillio whispered, his throat dry. Hastings ended the call and walked over. How are you feeling, Tillio? They will be angry, Tillio said, his voice small. You broke their rules. You'll be in trouble. All for me. I'm not worth it, Captain. Captain Hastings pulled up a chair and sat down. He looked at Tillio, his eyes sad. That's where you're wrong, he said. That's the lie they've been telling you. The one they told you so often you started to believe it. He leaned forward. Tillio, back on Earth, our home, we have a long, bloody history. We fought each other for centuries. And we learned a lot of lessons, usually the hard way. But one of the most important lessons, the one we built our entire society on, is that you cannot put a price on a life. You cannot say one person is worth more and another is worth less. But I'm a drain, Tillio said, repeating the word he'd heard his whole life. No, Hastings said, his voice firm. You're a person. And that's all the worth you need. That's all any of us need. The Vanguard is preparing to leave. We'll be out of here in an hour. You'll be safe. But it wasn't that simple. An alarm suddenly blared. A red light flashed in the medbay. Captain? Sergeant Rosalind's voice yelled over the intercom. They're here. Xylo and Vorgus, and they brought a full squad of Krogar warriors. They're at the main airlock. They're demanding we return Tillio. On what grounds? Hastings snapped, already on his feet and moving to the door. They're claiming he's stolen station property. Tillio's blood turned to ice. Property. Not a person. A resource. A cog. Captain, Tillio pleaded, just give me to them. Don't start a war. Not for me. Captain Hastings stopped at the door. He turned around and Tillio saw a flash of that same cold fury he'd seen in Sergeant Rosalind. Starting a war, Tillio, Hastings said, is sometimes the only way to end one. And this philosophy they have? It's a war on everyone who isn't strong enough to fight back. And I will not be a party to it. He hit the intercom. All hands, this is the captain. Prepare for emergency undocking procedure. Set a course for the rendezvous point. We are leaving. Now. Sir, came another voice. They're cutting through the airlock. They've got plasma cutters. The ship shuddered. Tillio could hear the distant high-pitched scream of metal being torn apart. They were coming for him. Hastings to engineering, the captain roared. I don't care about the station's fuel lines. I don't care about the docking clamps. Sever everything. Get us out. There was a moment of hesitation. But Captain, the blowback. The station. Our own fuel reserves. We won't make it to the rendezvous. I am not, Captain Hastings said, his voice a low, deadly growl, losing a patient to a mob. Do it. That is a direct order. There was a moment of terrible, grinding silence. Then the Vanguard screamed. It wasn't a clean undocking. It was a rip. Tillio was thrown from his bed as the entire ship was rocked by a massive, violent explosion. The emergency clamps, the fuel lines, the access tunnels. Captain Hastings had just torn his billion-dollar warship away from the station. Alarms blared. Tillio heard the screams of Krogars in the corridor, cut off as the airlock was breached. The ship groaned, the lights flickered and died, then came back on, running on emergency power. And then, silence. The gentle, low hum of engines. They were in space. They were free. Dr. Wells helped Tillio back onto the bed. He was shaking. He did it, Tillio whispered. He sacrificed his ship, his fuel, his career for me. That's what it means to be human, Tillio, Dr. Wells said, strapping him in. Welcome aboard. But Tillio saw the tactical display. The Vanguard was bleeding fuel. They were alone. And they had just made a very, very powerful enemy. The journey was tense. The Vanguard was crippled, running on fumes, but Captain Hastings and his crew were professionals. They limped to a secret rendezvous point, met a human fuel tanker and made their way back to Earth. The whole time Tillio was confused. He was treated with kindness. Not pity. Just decency. He'd sit in the mess hall and Private Darcy would sit with him, sharing a ration pack, telling him stories about Earth. He told Tillio about their own history, their own struggles for the rights of the disabled. How they too once had a culture of defects and drains. And how they fought it. How they passed laws. How they decided, as a planet, that a person's worth wasn't in what they could do, but in what they were. Tillio had never heard anything like it. When they arrived at Earth, Tillio was, for the first time in his life, terrified for a new reason. He was a refugee. An asylum seeker. A disabled alien from a species no one knew. He was granted asylum in less than an hour. He was taken to a medical facility that looked more like a park. They didn't just heal his broken ribs. They began to work on his old injury. His damaged sensory antenna. The thing that had defined him as broken his entire life. The nerve damage is extensive, the human doctor said. But we think we can help. We have some ideas. Took 6 months. 6 months of surgeries, therapy, and talking. They didn't just fix his body. They helped him fix his spirit. And the entire time the galaxy was in an uproar. Administrator Xylo had, of course, filed a formal complaint. The human piracy of station property. The destruction of the docking port. The dangerous human philosophy. But Captain Hastings had been recording. The entire incident in the alley. The beating. Xylo's efficiency speech. Darcy's "every life has worth" declaration. The plasma cutters. It all went viral on the galactic networks. And the galaxy was talking. It turned out the Kalan weren't the only ones. Dozens of other client species, races who lived under the boot of powerful utilitarian empires, started to question. The humans, for their part, didn't apologize. They doubled down. Tillio's recovery culminated in an invitation. Not from a doctor. From the United Nations, the humans' planetary government. They were holding a session of the new Galactic Council, and they wanted him to speak. Tillio, his antenna now partially functional, the phantom pains gone, stood at a podium. He was still small. He was still a Kalan. But he wasn't defective. He looked out at an assembly of hundreds of species. He saw Administrator Xylo in the crowd, his face a mask of hate. He saw Vorgus in chains being tried for crimes. And he saw Captain Hastings, Sergeant Rosalind, Private Darcy, and Corpsman Bennett, all sitting in the front row wearing their dress uniforms. Tillio spoke. He didn't speak of anger. He didn't speak of revenge. He spoke of his life, of the pain, of the indifference. And then he spoke of the intervention. He spoke of the impossible, insane, inefficient human idea that a life, his life, mattered. The humans, he said, his voice clear and strong, did not save me because I was a Kalan. They did not save me because I was worth it in a trade. They saved me simply because I was alive. And I was in pain. And they believed that was enough. He looked at the human delegation. They have taught me that worth is not a resource. It is a right. His speech didn't end the debate. But it started it. On Earth, Tillio helped the humans establish a refugee program. A program specifically for the disabled, the defective, the resource drains from all over the galaxy. It was a small act on a small station in a dark corridor. A bully, a victim, and a handful of soldiers. But the ripple from that single act of compassion, it didn't stop. It grew. It became a wave. And it was starting to wash the old, cruel, efficient galaxy away. All because 3 humans in a dark alley decided to stand up and say, "That's enough." And that's where our story ends for today. What do you think? It's amazing how one small act of kindness, one moment of standing up for what's right, can change, well, everything. If you enjoyed this story, if it made you feel something, please do me a favor and hit that like button. It really helps. And if you're new, consider subscribing and sharing this video with a friend who loves a good story. I've got a whole playlist of other stories just like this one, so be sure to check that out on the channel. And I want to know, what was your favorite part of Tillio's journey? What do you think of the human's philosophy? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. I read every single one, and I love hearing your suggestions for future tales. Thank you so much for spending this time with me. I hope you have a wonderful day, a peaceful night, or wherever you are. I wish you the very best. Until next time.